And
Mm.
that is what I think is the most
Okay, I'm
beautiful part.
sorry. That
Yeah.
that was like super beautiful. I need for you to say that again. That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. So, it's less about finding every answer and
Mm.
more about granting yourself the permission to explore who you are in a deeper way. You come on these heritage trips with a lot of questions, and sometimes you leave with even more questions. But just being able to have the empowerment, the information that you have now to go forth. I tell adoptees all the time, this trip is a stepping stone. It's not a beginning, it's not an end. How you want to go forward after this trip is up to you.
Welcome. I am so excited. Today I have with me Autumn Ackerson. This is Chanel Dupree, your host of the Skin Deep podcast. You are a part of a program and you do some different things, and I just want to get into that. Can you just take a moment to introduce yourself and share the work that you do?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Chanel. I'm very excited. This is my first podcast appearance, so I'm glad I'm doing it with you. But hello, my name is Autumn Ackerson. I am a Chinese adoptee that was adopted from China. I'm currently living in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is just south of Grand Rapids. So I've always been a Michigander. Love growing up here. So I work for the Ties program. So it is an organization that creates heritage travel experiences for adoptees and their loved ones. So we bring adoptees back to their countries of birth. So places like China, Korea, Colombia, Guatemala, Kazakhstan, and more, to help deepen cultural connections, nurture that belonging and honor every adoptee's unique story. So my role at Ties is I'm a program manager and I also work on our marketing. And so I plan and I guide these trips, but I also walk alongside adoptees, and their loved ones throughout the whole journey.
Thank you for that, Autumn. And I am going to be just very transparent. I had never heard of a heritage journey before. However, we have a mutual friend who recently took a trip, and I believe you were her guide. Is that correct? Okay, so
Yes.
you were her guide, and she just began talking to me about this, and I was like, this is amazing and phenomenal. I need to understand more. And so she connected us, and I'm just so happy that we were able to connect. Okay, so Autumn, how did you even get involved in this work?
Yeah, so I think very much like you, very much like a lot of people that I talk to about what I do for work. What is heritage travel? Growing up, I did not know that was a possibility. My adoptive mother and I have always talked about going back to China growing up, when we were going to do it, how we were going to do it. Um, and didn't even know, these companies that plan these trips were a thing. So growing up, we had an amazing little group of families who had children adopted from China in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and some of our family friends had taken this trip with the Ties program before, and they had told us, how amazing it was, how they were so impressed with how it was executed. Everything was done for them. They just had to show up. And so my mom and I were very much like, that's exactly what we need. And so in 2014, I was going into my senior year of high school. I thought that was a great time for me to return back to China. I felt, at the time, I felt very mature and that I could handle this kind of experience. So that's when we decided to go. My mom and I got connected with the Ties program. B. Evans, at the time, she was a co-owner of Ties, and she was in charge of the China program, and she led our trip to China, and B was absolutely amazing. She became a mentor for me down the road. But that trip, kind of sparked the beginning of my whole journey when it came to my relationship with Ties and working for them. So when I finished college in 2019, I decided to join what we call our adjunct travel team. And so these are adoptees, these are adoptive parents, these are people who they have a profession related to adoption or just adoption experts that we have travel on the trip on our ties trips. So that's something that's very unique to ties is we travel with you. So very much like our mutual friend that introduced us, I traveled on that trip with her, guiding them throughout China, making sure that the trip went smoothly, just like how B did for me. And so I did that after college. And then in 2023, I decided to join the team full time as a program manager and haven't looked back. It's been a wild ride, but definitely kind of a full circle moment.
I love that. Okay, so I actually want to go back, and because you said something, you said that you were really a part of a community in Michigan of fellow adoptees. So is that something that your mom kind of sought out, or what did that look like for you regarding your culture and your community and your identity? How did that show up for you as you were growing up?
Yeah, so, growing up in good old Midwest Michigan, there wasn't a very large, Chinese population there that we were exposed to early on. So it really was, you know, f- seeking out other families who had children adopted from China. Um, and I was adopted into a Caucasian family, and went to a school that was very diverse in the sense that it taught me a lot about different communities in the world, and exposed me to a lot of different races, except for my own. so, so it was really important growing up. My mom, and she was a single mom too, so it was just her and
Yeah.
I, still is just her and I. Um, but she really, she wanted to find community for me, but also, it was really important for her to find community for herself as well. Other adoptive
Mm.
parents, other single moms who had children who were adopted. So like I said, we had a beautiful, amazing branch in Kalamazoo of what's called families with children adopted from China. Um,
Mm.
and we would meet up for holidays, celebrations. We always had a Halloween party together. And sometimes the group was so large, I didn't meet every single person that was in that group. But just being able to come together, when we were young, I think it was more of like, we're hanging out, we're doing fun stuff together. It's not,
Yeah,
we're not
yeah.
having those deep conversations about what does it mean to be adopted at, 8 years
Mhm.
old. But it was really awesome to have that mirror, especially some of the adoptees that were older than me, even 2 or 3 years older than me, being able to look up to them and be surrounded by other people. And this is what we say on our heritage trips too. It's so important to be surrounded by people who have that same lived in experience as you do, and
Mhm,
being able to
mhm.
talk to people who, like we say, quote, get it, get
Yeah,
to understand what it's like to be adopted from China, understand what it's like to be adopted into a predominantly white family in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, like Michigan. Yes, yes. So I just want to give a shout out to your mom. Like your mom is amazing for having that kind of forward thinking, seeing what you would need, maybe even before you realized that you would need it,
hmm
developing that community. And so you said that you all kind of grew up together. Is that so you it was like a group of you all kind of kept up with one another in a way. Yes?
Yes. When we
Okay.
were young, I going off of that large group of families with children adopted from China, we had a smaller group where, some of the parents got a little bit closer throughout these events. And we actually called each other cousins, even though we knew we weren't cousins. But, we met up for, cookie decorating during Christmas,
Yeah.
birthdays, things like that. Um, and still keep in contact with some of those girls throughout these years, and actually one of them, she just traveled this past summer with me on the trip. So again, lots of full circle
Wow.
moments.
That's amazing. Okay, Autumn, I want for you to take us through your very first heritage journey that you and your mom did with ties. So, what were some of the emotions that you were feeling? What was if you could kind of think back on how it impacted you, can you share that a little bit more?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So, like I said, as a Chinese adoptee who grew up in the US and particularly Michigan, I know what it feels like to grow up with some pieces of your story missing and how complicated identity and belonging can feel. So, for a long time, I felt like I didn't have the spaces to talk about adoption in an honest way, nor did I feel comfortable doing so, or sometimes even know how to do so. So my own return to China came kind of in a way of me trying to find those ways to talk about it, to kind of make sense of it. Um, and something that I'm very open about talking through and about is my first return to China. As amazing as, the trip was as a trip, it showed me kind of how complex and layered my experience really is. I taught I once I landed in China, I felt very confused in a sense. And we talk this through with a lot of adoptees that return to their birth country for the first time. I felt very confused. You get to a point where you kind of have an identity crisis where it's like, okay, I'm in this environment where, I am not the minority anymore. People look like me. I don't stand out in a crowd anymore. If anything, my mom stands out in the crowd with her, crazy curly hair and her
Yeah.
her skin tone. But at the same time, although I look like I belong here, I don't sound like I belong here, and I don't
Mm,
dress like I am from here. I didn't speak fluent Mandarin. I still don't. So there
mm,
were still portions of me that felt very disconnected from China. And so throughout the trip, it was kind of that push and pull of like, okay, this is technically quote unquote home, but I don't like my emotions, my insides are not matching what I'm
yeah.
saying.
It's like you have
So
no memory of the home, but it's your
exactly,
home.
exactly. And
Yeah.
we also talk with adoptees through, when you return to your birth country, you may, a lot of things are going on in your mind, a lot of emotions are happening, but something that's pretty consistent is, your body can sometimes remember being back in China, or your body can remember the trauma that you went through when you were back in China, last. So I was going through a bunch of bodily things that were happening, a lot of anxieties, a lot of things that I couldn't label necessarily. So it was just overall a very overwhelming, confusing trip for me. But I think because of that first trip, reflecting back on it, and now that I've been back to China, 5, 6 times now, um, I'm so glad it happened in that way, because as I've gotten older, I've been able to reflect back on, what happened on that first trip. What did I need on that first trip that I didn't necessarily get?
Mm,
And what can I provide that to adoptees who are now in my shoes, 10 years ago?
yeah.
Um,
That is awesome. What an awesome guide to have.
yeah.
Like
Well,
you're
also
like looking
also
at them
just
like, yep,
being,
I see that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and also just being transparent that, it's not always roses and sparkles
Yeah.
and positive transformation all the time. Now, is was it
Yeah.
down the road? Absolutely. If that trip
Mm,
hadn't happened, I wouldn't be where I am right now working with ties and being able to do the work that I do. And again, reflect back on my own personal experience. Now, is this the experience of every single adoptee? No, and just talking from my
mhm.
personal experience, but being able to take from that and put myself into the shoes of these adoptees, because I was them at one point and I still am. Every time I go back to China, it's a different experience. I learn something new every single time. But just
Mm.
being able to have that experience, it fuels me to create these journeys for others.
What did you do to process your first journey? So when you got back, I don't even know if you really had like the language or if you understood what was happening. I know reflecting, yes, but
Yeah.
when you came back home, did you process through it? Like how did you move throughout the world after that?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll be transparent with you. I don't even think I processed it fully coming back.
Mm.
Like I said, I was going into my senior year of high school. A lot of things were taking front of mind for me, like college applications. What is my
Yeah.
prom dress going to look like? What colleges am I going to go to? What kind of essay do I have to write for this application? So I feel
Yeah.
like, while I said, this is going to be a perfect time for me, there really is no quote perfect time for people to return to their birth country. But for me, it felt right to do it at that time. And like I said, I wouldn't go back and change anything about it.
Mm.
But processing wise, it really surprisingly, I didn't fully process the trip until I went back again with ties in 2019. So after I graduated college, have a few more years of gaining some maturity under my belt, a few more
Mhm,
years of
mhm.
therapy to really dissect everything that is going on in my, beautiful brain of mine. When I went back for the second time to China, and actually, returning in a more leadership role to where, the focus isn't on me now. It's more on
Yeah,
these adoptees who are traveling, and I'm just trying to lead them through it and trying to help them put words to emotions. And now I kind of get to experience it in a whole different light. So because I was
yeah,
able to experience it in a whole different light, and also nothing against my adopted mother, but because she wasn't there, we talk a lot about adoptee loyalty and
mm,
how that can affect a heritage trip, or it can affect an adoptee's experience. Because my mother was not there on that second trip with me, I was able to kind of sit more in my feelings and sit more in my
yeah,
thoughts and be
yeah,
able to be like, okay, it makes sense now. I was feeling this way, maybe didn't want to express it in front of her, or maybe didn't know how to express it in front of her. But
yeah.
now that I'm sitting here in this hotel room by myself, I actually have time to
Hmm.
think. Watching, as time goes on, there are so many amazing studies and resources and organizations out there that are giving adoptees voices and putting their experiences out there. So now, these adoptees that I'm leading just even this past summer, they are so much more knowledgeable than I was at their age.
Mm,
They have so many more resources out there to um, explore their culture, to explore even just like how to go back to China. And so it's amazing.
yeah.
I learned so much from these adoptees who I travel with. And again, kind of envious in the sense of like, oh my gosh, you are light years ahead of where I was at your age when I first returned to China. And so every single time I go back to China, I'm able to process that first trip even more and make sense of it even more.
I love that. And so a couple things. There is something about reading something and like doing the resources, but that you cannot replace being there, like actually going and
Yes.
experiencing an environment and interacting with people. Like, listen, AI cannot duplicate that. That is just something that human connection and contact and just being immersed in something. And so, the fact that they're pairing their research and learnings with the real practical experience and going, that's beautiful, and that feels like true immersion in a way.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's amazing what's out there these days.
Okay, so Autumn, and take us through your journey, or take us through a journey of a family that's considering attending, so going on a heritage journey. So they get off the plane, what happens?
A lot of things happen. I mean, a lot of things happen even leading up to them stepping off that plane. Um,
Okay.
but so what we specialize in is group travel. So we also do private travel, but what we really specialize in is group travel. And kind of what I mentioned before is, there's something beautiful and magical about being in a community of people that have the same lived experience as you of being adopted. And I'll talk from the experience of, being adopted from China. And same with the adoptive parents or the loved ones that come. It's beautiful to see them in this community, that they have connections with people that get it. Again, quote, get it. So when they step off that plane, we get them to the hotel for China. We start in Beijing. And so we all gather in Beijing. These are families from all over the United States. We also cater to families around the world. So, but this past summer it was families from all over the United States. And, we've done Zoom calls, they've seen pictures of each other, but nothing like, seeing each other for the first time in person in China. Um,
Ah, okay, hold on. I didn't realize
yeah,
that. So there's like this kind of prep period that happens.
there is. Yes, yes.
Okay.
So, I'll start from the very beginning actually now. So
Yeah.
we usually open up our trips a year in advance, sometimes even more than a year. And these are itineraries that we have meticulously curated from our years of experience. The TIES program has been around since 1994. So we have quite a lot of years under our belt, and we create these itineraries, and we put them out there, and families from all over just register for our trip online. And then that's kind of when the ball starts rolling. That's when I really start getting into the nitty-gritty of planning with all these families. So I sit down, they fill out all these forms. I sit down and say, hey, what do you want this trip to look like? Specifically talking to the adoptee, what are some things that you want to do? What are some check boxes that you have always dreamed of doing in China, experiencing in China, seeing in China? And sitting down and kind of curating this itinerary. Other than the group travel portion that's already been planned out, I have in the middle of the trip, specifically for China and for a lot of our TIES trips, adoptees can do adoption reconnections. So those reconnections can look like, for China example, for example, it can look like orphanage visiting. So going back to the orphanage that they were at. So I was at an orphanage for 2 years. That was something that I wanted to see and experience. Adoptees can go back to what we call their finding spot. So there are a lot of different terms in the adoption community. So I want to acknowledge that first and foremost. So I use certain phrases and terms. So finding spot, so that is the spot where adoptees were left. Some people say abandoned or found. And sometimes if they're with a foster family, we try to reconnect them with those. But so that portion of the trip, I customize. So that goes in the middle of our trip. They go to their province, which is very much like states in the United States, like,
Okay.
Michigan, there's provinces in China. And so they go to their provinces, and I completely customize that portion of the trip. And then we meet back up in the South as a group, and we finish out the trip together. So there's a lot of planning that goes into before they even step off the plane. We're talking about visas, we're talking about flights, travel insurance, itinerary, guides, drivers, hotels, accommodations, things like that. So there's a lot that goes into it before they even step off the plane.
Their birth records, like all those details. I mean, all that has to be gathered and understood and planned out and like all those, I mean, that just feels very detail oriented, especially when we're talking about like where they were found or,
Mhm.
like who do you go beforehand or like how would you know where to go and how to navigate those details?
Yeah, so particularly talking about my paperwork, it says I was found in this parking lot of a hospital, and it's pretty detailed. So I will acknowledge some adoptees, their information may not be as detailed. Some of them may be missing that information. Some of that information may be falsified. So there's um, a lot of different situations out there. But for the most part, when adoptees come to me and they want to travel on this trip, they send me all of their paperwork. I go through it with my amazing in-country supplier. His name is James. He is in China. And so I work with
Okay.
him to go back and forth on this paperwork. What is it feasible to go to this place? Is it still around? Some orphanages have been torn
Right.
down. Some of them are just closed, or some of them, like mine, have been turned into kind of assisted living facilities.
Mm.
And new orphanages have been built. There's a bunch of different situations that happen. So they send me all their information. I go through it. We figure out what can work on this trip, how much they are willing and wanting to see. Some adoptees don't want to see their orphanage that they are at. Some of them don't want to see their finding spots, and that's totally fine. It's exactly, I want to make this trip exactly how they want it to be and what they want to
Yeah.
experience. So we just kind of have those conversations throughout the whole planning process.
Mm. If you are interested in learning more about the family history in America and how the child welfare system was even built, I want to invite you to dive into the online and on demand Skin Deep: The History of Child Welfare by Race course. Because you're coming from the Skin Deep podcast community, I'll have a special discount code for you in the show notes below. Let's dive deeper on behalf of families.